Alright, this is DHG, and I'm finally concluding Dead Space 3. How bad is it? It took me about 6 months to finish this. I started this project shortly after Halloween Horror in 2022, and it's taken me until now to complete the game, complete the playthrough, because it's just so boring and unoriginal, and it is so far from what the series did good in Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2. So, how bad is it, Dead Space 3? It's bad. I can't give it a terrible rating in terms of sticking to the franchise and what they see as the new gameplay shit they tried to do and all that. It would be terrible, but I mean, it's technically competent. I didn't experience any bugs. The only problems I had with the software itself was with EA's app. Either Origin or Desktop, take your pick. They're both garbage. Anything EA makes software-wise is just a freaking nightmare. Okay, so I've got my plus and minus chart here that I jotted some things down. And I'm going to get to one I didn't write down first, because if I don't, I'll forget. That would be the ending of the game. This is not your typical Dead Space, as I've already mentioned. This goes more with the, let's just say, what Resident Evil 6 did with changing it to action horror instead of survival horror. Because ammo is plentiful in this game. You're never going to run out of ammo. And all the weapons take the same ammo, so there's no real resource management. You're not upgrading your weapons. You're just swapping out barrels and shit like that. It doesn't work. Not for this game. It may have worked for others, but Dead Space was better off before they tried all this shit. And I gotta say, the ending of the game was your typical action horror with this weird love romance thing thrown in, and I thought it was a bad ending. Isaac and Carver sacrifice themselves to stop the markers and all that stuff, and Ellie makes it out alive. I thought she was dead. I was hoping she was because she's annoying. But, no, she makes it out. She makes it back to wherever she was going, and then I only recorded up until the credits started rolling. I should have put in the last little bit where you hear Isaac saying, Ellie, Ellie. So apparently he lived somehow. Really dumb. I mean, if you watch the ending of the game, you'd see why I find that a little improbable. It was just bad storytelling, so I'm going to get into my plus and minuses, with a minus being the ending. Number one, charging real money for in-game resources. Okay, now this was something that I covered early on, and again, I think it was part 1, the beginning. They might have patched this, because by the end of this playthrough, I had so much tungsten, which was the main resource you couldn't ever find enough of in the beginning. I had so much of that shit I didn't know what to do with it. So maybe EA, or not EA, Visceral, whoever made this game, maybe they patched that and they upped the drop supply and upped how much you get from the salvage bots and all that stuff. But I do remember two things that didn't change. You send out the little salvage bots, and they collect these ration seals. And those ration seals you can buy from the EA store, which is they tried to do microtransactions with this game, because this was during a period of time when every single game coming out had microtransactions, because, corporations be greedy. What else can you say? Trying to milk you for every penny you've worth, and this game was no different. It had microtransactions, and one of these microtransactions was the tungsten resource, which you needed to upgrade pretty much everything. So that was one bad thing, especially because this is mostly a single-player game. You can do co-op, and here's some... I'm about to get in my head of myself. But yeah, charging people real-life money for in-game resources is just a shit idea. Survival horror is dead. Resources are abundant, and the horror in this game is pretty much non-existent. Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2 did a good job with the horror atmosphere. There are some scenes in Dead Space 2 that still make me cringe to this day thinking about it, like the scene with Isaac and the needle. And then there was a lot of good survival horror. It was kind of like Resident Evil 4 style survival horror that was present in the first Dead Space. None of that's here. This is all like... I mean, just look at the screen. It's all action. They made an action game out of this. And like I said, you got more than enough ammo. You can create ammo. You can create med kits. Yeah, it's an action game now. I can see why the series died here. Another minus. The love interest main story is juvenile. Oh yeah, I forgot about that guy. I can't remember his name. He was so Horton? Yeah. There was a love interest, a little love triangle between the girl, Ellie, Isaac, and this dude named Horton, and they were always bickering with each other. It sounded like teenage high school bullshit. It was so juvenile and so uninteresting, so boring, and it was so out of place in a Dead Space game. It really made it hard to take this game seriously. I mean, everything does, but that was particularly annoying. Another minus. Does not feel like Dead Space. I've already said that like a million times. Another minus. Tension is gone. It has a relaxed feel. That it does. You're not really going to be gripping your controller, you know, like, oh my god, what's around the next corner, or I hope there's no jump scare here. No, they just keep throwing shit at you. It feels like, at times it feels like a rail shooter. It gets so ridiculous and so in your face and so unoriginal. Another minus, co-op trend infection. Yeah, that was another gaming trend at that time. I've already mentioned microtransactions. Another was every horror game at the time throwing in either co-op or some sort of multiplayer. I'll give you some more specific instances. Resident Evil 5 had co-op. Resident Evil 6 had a large co-op and a lot of multiplayer modes, but at least Resident Evil 6 was fun to play. What else? Condemned 2 had online like versus multiplayer, which would have been better off just putting its resources towards a single player campaign, and there is a bunch of other games like that. Just following the gaming trends at the time, whether or not it fit the game or not. I don't know if this was the decision of the developers or the publishers at EA. Probably both. Another minus. There's a lot of the same enemy types, yeah. You'll keep running into the same shit over and over and over and over and over in this game. Which leads me to something else. In the previous two games, you dismembered a lot of enemies to kill them, or they would just regenerate to body parts and become unstoppable killing machines. In this one, you don't have to do that. You're not shooting off any body parts, you're just shooting them. That took away a lot of the tension from the get. Yeah, that was something I mentioned. Tension is gone. It's because you're not dismembering these things anymore. You just, launch a grenade or some other overpowered weapon at them, and they're dead. So that's gone. That was one of the prime mechanics that Dead Space had going for it that was unique to this series, and this series only, and they threw it out the window. Cover mechanics. Another downside. Yeah, cover mechanics. Why the hell does Dead Space 3 have a cover mechanic? I mean, they start the game out like this. Let me go to one of the other videos. The intro. Yeah, right here. As I say, gaming trends at the time. This was another gaming trend. Every single game had to have a cover mechanic because of Gears of War. Everyone was copying them. Like I said, action game. This isn't survival horror. Not to mention the crouch was completely stupid. So yeah, there's a cover mechanic in here. Bad decision. Microtransactions for an important resource. I already covered that. When the game came out, like I said, tungsten was a very rare resource. I didn't have enough my first playthrough to even keep a torque bar on me for the locked doors. Another minus. Some areas are locked due to co-op. Yeah, I noticed about 3 of these during this playthrough. There's certain areas of the game that you can't play by yourself. So essentially, if you don't plan on playing this co-op, if you want the classic Dead Space 1, Dead Space 2 feel, or at least try to get that feel, you're going to be locked out of a couple different missions in the game just because you have to have a co-op partner to initiate them. Does that sound like a good idea to you? No, it's shit. It's a horrible idea, but they did it. Let's get to some of the pluses. The exploration is kind of cool. Well, that's pretty much with all the Dead Space games. That's still here. The weapon bench is kind of... I should have put that as not really a plus or a minus, so I'm going to change that one to a neutral. Weapon bench. The weapon bench leads to a lot of overpowered weapons later on in the game. Plus, it also takes away from upgrading your weapons, like which ones work best for you in which situations. So I can see how some people wouldn't like that. I didn't really end up liking it by the end either. I used the same weapons throughout most of the entire game. Graphically impressive. Yeah, for an old game it still does look pretty good. Voice acting and sound are good. For the most part, yeah, they were. There were a couple voice actors in this game that made me cringe, like the dude that plays Danik with a British accent. Why did he have a British accent? Because he's the villain, apparently. They gotta have British accents. The drill event was... yeah, that was... I didn't record that, but that was a pretty cool event where you have to... there's this giant drill that goes haywire and you have to try to avoid it. That was pretty freaking cool. Okay, so that's about it. I'm going to get into the review, since the plus and minuses are done. Graphics. I mean, I don't think it advances off of much of what Dead Space 2 had already done, but still Dead Space 2 is a great looking game. This game looked good on console, and it... obviously, from a game from the 360 PS3 era, you're going to see some pretty bad textures, but other than that, it looks alright. Controls. Traditional Dead Space controls, which generally worked very well for the game, but unfortunately they turned this into an action game. So I would have to say the controls are now, they went from having a good control scheme for what they were doing in this series to a bad one, because it's not fluid enough, it's not nuanced enough to really keep up with the fast-paced action that they have in this game. Unlike Resident Evil 6, which pretty much did the same thing as Dead Space 3, except Resident Evil 6 created a whole new control scheme, and it worked out very well. In fact, I love Resident Evil 6's control scheme. If only they didn't have you getting knocked on your ass every time you lost a health bar. Gameplay. The gameplay in this game sucked. They threw in a lot of new kinesis shit and some puzzles. All the puzzles were pretty much brain dead. A monkey could do them. But you pretty much get from point A to point B. Like I said, it took me 6 months to complete just because the game was so freaking boring. It was only like a 13-hour long game too, which should say a lot, because I've played games that are pretty freaking bad. Sound. I don't think the sound in that game was this great. I mean, there wasn't really a lot of the ambience in the background that the old Dead Space had. There wasn't that dead silence that made you kind of unearthed you a little bit, if you know what I mean. But there wasn't really any compelling music in the background either. Not to mention Danik's annoying as shit. Story. The story was dumb as hell. They really fell headfirst into the making it something a lot bigger than it should be. It didn't make a lot of sense. I mean, I think survival horror does best when they keep the story small, but this isn't survival horror, it's a grand action game, and this fell into the same old pit of turds that Resident Evil 6 did, with just making it so big it's unbelievable. Stability and bugs, that's the only good thing this game has going for it. It didn't crash on me, it remained fairly stable. I don't know if this was the game's fault, but every now and then I had some weird frame rates in the game. But if you stopped it and started it back up again, it went away. I don't know what the cause of that was. Opinions. I would like to see more Dead Space. And recently they redid the first Dead Space. I haven't gotten to play it yet. I might do it for Halloween Horror this year. But I really hope that either they put the same team on this and they've learned from their mistakes, or they get a new team entirely. Because if they pump out another Dead Space 3, people are just going to leave this franchise forever, including me. But I like the Dead Space series. Dead Space 1 and 2 were some very good games, but this Dead Space 3, good God, it's freaking terrible. And that's my conclusion for Dead Space 3. If you like the series, just keep playing 1 and 2. Avoid 3 unless you're some kind of a masochist that just wants to revel on how much it sucks. Because there are people like that. I'm one of them. This is DHG, and I'm out.